Unfortunately, I had to call off of work. I've been sick the last couple days. Instead of dropping by my local Ripper Doc, I decided to finish Phantom Liberty. And I gotta say, it blew my mind, chooms. By the end of the story, it had this sort of impact that I would put akin to edge runners. I wanted to catch my raw reaction, so I actually posted it in one of my favorite Discord channels. By the end of the game, I had this weird cocktail of emotions where I was super sad and angry. Like, how did this happen? Mixed with just pure brain explosion. I was just mind blown at the way that this story took turns and directions that even I wasn't ready for. It genuinely might be my favorite story in a game ever. Now, before I get too in the nitty and gritty with that, I did want to say, your experience likely depends on what you're looking for in a game. For me, I really enjoy strong emotional impact. I don't care if it's excitement or sad or angry. I love it when a game can evoke those emotions, and Cyberpunk did just that, but multiple simultaneously. I still don't know what emotion feels most specific to how the main story went. Stepping away from the story for a moment, if you've ever seen the game Only Up, I've never played it, but that's very much how I felt in a lot of scenes with this game. There's a lot more interesting level designs, with verticality being a constant thing, and it made using the leg plants I paid for so much more satisfying. Not to mention, it felt like they spared no expense in making multiple rooms with no specific sequence where you were told to go through them. I was actually kind of lost at different points in the missions in a way that felt sort of exciting and exhilarating that I had to figure out where it was. The game wasn't telling me exactly where I needed to be. Also, there seemed to be a lot more accessible rooms utilizing your different abilities throughout the game, such as using body or tech, etc. to actually break into these rooms. Now, before we jump into my thoughts on the story, how am I young enough to understand cyberpunk lingo pretty well, but too old to understand if smooth brain is meant as a compliment or not? For the longest time, I thought telling someone to touch grass was like telling someone to go 6 feet under. My wife still makes fun of me for this. Does anyone else have this experience, or is it just me out here? Now, something I didn't recognize until I got further into the game was a lot of the small things that I did or didn't do actually had an impact on my game. A great example here, without giving any details away, is I ended up doing a specific gig, not thinking too much of it while there was some downtime in the game, because there seems to be downtime at different points, which I personally enjoy. I think it's a very good way of going about the game. And after working on this gig, I then went back into the main story, and a little while later, it actually had an impact on my experience with the main story. It opened up some options for me that I didn't even realize were there. I thought this was really cool, especially because the game did not spell it out for me whatsoever. Touching on the gigs, I've done about 3 or 4 now, and each one actually was very well done. At one point I was fighting these cyber robots where they just seemingly never ended and kept coming until I finally beat the mini-boss there. And the stories intertwined therein were incredibly intriguing, often with multiple choices that I could make that would essentially impact the way that everything wrapped up. As well as, I went back to those places and saw differences in the environment because of the choices that I made. The gigs in this DLC were Nova. Moving on to my experiences with the actual story itself, this is one of the few games where I actually had a huge desire to replay the story. So many choices I made and events that transpired, I was always left wondering, if I did this differently, would this have happened? Could I have prevented this from happening? Could I have made this happen? With the main story quest in the original Cyberpunk, I enjoyed it, but not to this level. And I wasn't often left with the question of, well, what if I had done this, or what if I had done that? But that was something I continuously thought of while actually playing Phantom Liberty. Even now while recording, I'm brainstorming, what do I want to do differently in my next playthrough? Something else that was done very well with the main story is the level of intrigue. I was often so curious about all the different characters, all of the different events, all of the different choices I could make. I never knew what was going to happen next, with a few exceptions. Also, the art direction and scenery, again, was just spot on. I felt completely immersed in the game. The art direction was gorgeous. It made me wanting a much better rig so I could enjoy it at the overdrive path tracing. I really enjoyed that the game leaned into the spyware with all the different gadgets that you can run into, the different vehicles that seem to be rigged with that type of thing, the different cyberware that you yourself can get because of it. The game made me feel like I was an actual spy in Dogtown. Speaking of which, the gangs that were present in Dogtown were actually very cool. They felt very brutal. They built this atmosphere of tension, heavy militarization, and breathed to life the actual tyranny that was inside of Dogtown. You'd go and talk or listen to other people talk about how they went there for their freedom and they feel like they're actually getting it. While listening to other people talk, they felt like a slave to this location. It did a very good job of adding on to the level of sadness that I felt was present in Dogtown. You constantly see people all over the streets, poor, just like in Night City. This was complemented well by the opposite effect of all of the different people who were having a great time and were living their best selves or their real selves to the fullest extent, getting decked out with all the cyborg gear they could possibly find, thriving in the chaos of the city as opposed to being torn down for it. I can't speak for Night City after Update 2.0 because I've spent most of my time in Dogtown at this point, but something I realized is if you go Ganic and you're getting shot at, you're going to be 6 feet under in no time. I played the game on very hard, which is my recommended difficulty to get the best experience, and I was nowhere near a bullet sponge. Especially if I didn't have enough cyberware on, a couple bullets aimed in my direction would flatline me real quick. Now there were a few things that I wasn't a big fan of with the DLC. The first one was, there were premises for missions in-game that were very much all or nothing. One of the bosses I ran into was pretty much impossible to fight head-on, despite that being my playstyle at the time, because getting hit once took off about 85% of my health. And this was not a super ability, it was just him hitting me. He was also fairly tanky on top of that. I eventually just ran away from him, sprinkled him with ammo, ran away from him, sprinkled him with ammo, etc. until I put him down. For me, that wasn't a fun experience, it's just something I felt like I needed to get through to progress the story. There was also another mission I didn't care for because there's this instant death mechanic. This very well could just be a me thing, but guaranteed death from enemies is seldom interesting for me, even if the context for it makes sense. I like being able to fight back even if there's a low chance of survival, as opposed to I fail something very specific and it guarantees my death. I just don't find that very engaging. Finally, I would have loved to look all borged out with my tech. Unfortunately, most cyberware enhancements have minimal or no effect on your actual look. I want to be a walking heap of chrome. Hopefully modders add this in the future, but for now, it's just left to my imagination. In Phantom Liberty, I felt engaged by so many different characters, all of them with their hand in the cookie jar seeking to get something out of it. Navigating each character's wants and concerns, their motives, etc. left me much more connected with each and every character. Even the fixer in this one was much more connected to the actual story. I won't say much more than that because I don't want to spoil anything, but it truly made me enjoy the experience that much more, knowing that the fixer wasn't just somebody sending me jobs occasionally. Something I really didn't anticipate was the game did a great job at humanizing Johnny. The original main story left me kind of back and forth with Johnny. I didn't hate him as a character, but I didn't have this compassion for him either. This, however, gave a lot more background to Johnny and why he is the way he is, who he was before he became this terrorist that blew up Arasaka, and I actually really enjoy his character now. And I have a lot more empathy for him as a person. I'm really interested to see how many of you end up having this experience as you play through the DLC. I'm straight stoked to discuss spoilers in the next couple weeks when everyone's had a chance to play through it. Until then, I'll keep the deets to myself. Signing off, Choombas. Watch out for lead in your back.